I never thought closing my driveway would ignite a full-blown war. But then again, I had underestimated Karen Wilson, my neighbor and the self-appointed queen of the Maplewood Homeowners Association. It was a warm Saturday morning in early spring. I sat on the porch, sipping coffee, and watching my two kids play in the yard. They had been trying to get their bikes out for weeks, but it had become a hazard. Close calls, scraped knees, and one too many near accidents. That's when I decided to close the driveway for their safety. A simple lock on the gate. It seemed like a reasonable decision. By noon, I had installed the lock, double-checking that everything was secure. I felt a sense of relief. My kids were safe. But my peace was short-lived. Karen's voice cut through the quiet like a siren. "You can't do that," she shrieked, storming over in her usual power walk, clipboard in hand, her sharp heels clicking against the pavement. She pointed at the locked driveway, her face twisted in outrage. "This is against the HOA rules. You need to open it right now." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Karen, I did this for my kids' safety. I checked the guidelines. I didn't see anything about driveways needing to stay open." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I don't care what you think you saw. If I say it's a violation, it's a violation." Before I could argue, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." I let out a dry laugh. "You're seriously calling the cops over a lock?" She didn't respond. She was already dialing. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air. A patrol car rolled up, and two officers stepped out, looking mildly irritated. They had better things to do than deal with HOA drama. Karen wasted no time making a scene, waving her arms wildly. "Officer, he's violating community rules. He locked his driveway. This is a safety issue. For everyone." The officers listened patiently, then turned to me. "Sir, do you have any documentation on this?" I showed them the HOA guidelines I had reviewed, along with proof that my driveway was on my property. The officers exchanged glances. "Ma'am, this isn't a criminal matter. You'll need to take it up with the HOA." Karen's face turned red. "This is unacceptable." But the officers had already seen enough. They gave me a nod and left. Karen stormed back to her house, muttering under her breath. But I had a feeling this wasn't over. And I was right. Later that afternoon, a letter from the HOA was stuffed in my mailbox. My heart sank as I read it. Violation notice. Unauthorized alteration of driveway access. Fine, $500. Immediate compliance is required. I clenched my fists. This was absurd. Just as I was processing the situation, my cousin Ray, who lived a few streets over, called. "I heard about your run-in with Karen. You okay?" "She hit me with a fine," I muttered. Ray let out a low whistle. "That woman is out of control. You should fight it." "I intend to." That evening, I dug into the HOA's bylaws, searching for any loophole I could use. And what I found was shocking. Karen had been manipulating rules, changing HOA meeting minutes, and adding policies without a proper vote. She had built a system where she controlled everything. It wasn't just my driveway. She had been harassing other neighbors, fining them for things as minor as having the wrong color mailbox or parking in their own driveways. This wasn't just a dispute. This was a battle for control, and I was ready to fight. The next morning, I took my case to the HOA office. The receptionist, an older woman with tired eyes, barely looked up as I approached. "I need to appeal a violation notice," I said, placing the letter on the counter. She sighed, pushing a form toward me. "Fill this out. The board meets next month." "Next month? That's ridiculous. I have proof that my driveway is legally mine and that Karen overstepped her authority." "Sorry, sir. That's the process." I clenched my jaw. "Then I'll take it to the county zoning board." That got her attention. "You don't want to do that. The HOA doesn't like when people go around them." "Yeah? Well, I don't like being extorted." I stormed out and dialed Ray. "We need to dig deeper. If Karen's pulling this stunt with me, how many others has she done this to?" Ray's voice held a hint of amusement. "I think it's time for a neighborhood meeting. Let's see how many people are willing to push back." That evening, I knocked on the doors. Most neighbors were hesitant, afraid of retaliation. But as I spoke, a pattern emerged. Karen had fined the Petersons for leaving their garbage cans out too long. The Millers had been cited for planting flowers not approved by the HOA's guidelines. Even Ray had received a warning about his porch lights. "She's turning this place into a dictatorship," Millie, my next-door neighbor, said. crossing her arms. "We can fight this," I said, "but we have to do it together." By the end of the night, we had 15 households willing to challenge the HOA. The battle had officially begun. The night before the HOA meeting, I barely slept. The momentum was on our side, but Karen was the type of person who never backed down. Without a fight, I had no doubt she was already scheming, planning some underhanded tactic to shut us down before we even got a chance to speak. When I arrived at the Maplewood Community Center, the parking lot was packed. More people had shown up than I expected. The air buzzed with tension as neighbors whispered amongst themselves. Karen stood at the front of the room, flanked by her loyalists, wearing a smug expression like she had already won. The meeting started with the usual formalities, but I didn't waste any time. I stood up. "I have a motion to bring before the board." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You'll need to submit a formal request for the next meeting. According to the bylaws, if enough homeowners are present, they have the right to introduce new motions immediately." I glanced around, and I think we have more than enough. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. What's your motion?" I cleared my throat. "A vote to audit the HOA's financial records and policy changes over the last 5 years. We have evidence that violations and fines have been implemented without proper board approval." Gasps spread across the room. Karen's face paled. "That's absurd," she snapped. "There's no need for an audit. Our finances are fully transparent." "Then you won't mind if we take a look?" I shot back. She turned to her loyalists, but cracks were starting to show. People were shifting in their seats, whispering among themselves. Even the board members looked uncertain, all in favor of the audit. I called out. Hands shot up. More than enough to pass the motion. Karen's jaw clenched, but she had no choice. "Motion carried," she gritted out. "The audit will proceed." 2 weeks later, Ray and I sat in his garage, surrounded by boxes of financial statements, HOA meeting minutes, and policy documents. The board had reluctantly